Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Millionaire by Morning podcast show. We have with us here today a Mr. Kelly Kirk. He's a pro bodybuilder and the founder of 222Muscle. He's a high school
I am
wellness
here.
educator, and he's here to speak with us today about things such as perseverance and just tell us about his journey and how it can relate to us and the viewers of the Millionaire by Morning podcast. Welcome to the show, Kelly Kirk.
Thank you, sir. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, man, I like to tell all of our guests you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us today, and we are very grateful for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, man, first and foremost, I would like to get straight into it, man. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and who it is that you serve.
So I am 56 years old. I'm smack in the middle of Generation X and had a pretty, uneventful, successful life up until about the time I hit 40. And about 40 years old, all heck came crashing down. And I've just kind of dealt with a lot of stuff since then. And the last major thing that happened to me, losing my fiance about 4 years ago, I ended up starting 222Muscle, a Sophia Graham Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. And I'm actually out now talking to kids and businesses and trying to teach people growth on all levels, personal, spiritual, financial, anything, but especially growth when they didn't think it was possible. We've all been there at that bad spot where we didn't know how we were going to move forward. And that's kind of where I'm at. I've just published a book and just really out there trying to teach people that where you are now is not where you have to be.
Got it. Okay, man. So being a part of Generation X, smack dab in the middle of Generation X, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? A lot of us know, latchkey children, latchkey kids. You kind of raised yourself during that time. So, the person that you are today, do you relate who you are today to the person that you were growing up?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably just the internal strength. I think all of us, like you said, I wasn't latchkey, but definitely, had a different upbringing than the kids today do. I teach high school, and I tell these kids all the time, I'm like, yep. We used to go out, we'd leave at 7 a.m. on our bicycle and wouldn't come home until the street lights came on, so it's definitely different than what they deal with right now. But I look at a lot of the stuff that we went through in that generation as kind of being, what built me and who I am now, not to mention just the relationships with my friends, with my family, my brother, especially, all of that. And it goes from everything from learning stuff, how we approach sports, how you approach losses, to, picking on each other. I tell these kids at school all the time, they get so hurt on stuff, friends. And I'm like, are you guys friends? Yeah. I said, you guys should be picking on each other. I said, if I ever walked into a room with my 5 best friends and they said something nice to me, I would think, I was at the end of the line. I said, I fully expect my friends to bust on me. So I think a lot of that, even then, being little, growing up through high school, I was always the smallest. I was tiny all the way through high school. And instead of shying away from that, I think my mom and dad pushed me to kind of lean into it. When I was 6 years old, I guess, trying to play t-ball, I'll never forget one of the first times it dawned on me that I was little. I tried out for t-ball, and I remember walking back to the car with my mom, and she was talking to the coach, and the coach told her I was too little to play. I probably should find something else to do. And, I had never heard that. I mean, I'd been protected, I'm 6 years old. And my dad ended up stepping up. My dad said, well, the hell he is. I guess I'll coach. So my dad ended up coaching the team. So I played, and I ended up being a pretty good darn baseball player, later on and through high school and playing varsity ball. But that was one of the first times that I really remember seeing kind of any adversity over my size, because like I said, I was little. And even now, growing up and becoming a pro bodybuilder, 8 months ago, that was one of those sports where size doesn't, necessarily matter, because you've got a lot of other stuff they're looking at. But at the end of the day, it's still muscle on muscle. And 2 years ago, I ended up on stage winning my class at Masters Nationals in Pittsburgh. And the guy standing next to me was 262 pounds. And, I felt like I looked better than him. I had better conditioning. I had better symmetry. But at the end of the day, he's 100 pounds heavier than me. And 100 pounds is 100 pounds, no matter how you want to slice it. But I think I can take that kind of stuff and look back at, growing up and just kind of how we had to deal with things and how we approached the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do too, man. I see it coming around full circle with a lot of the people that I speak with. And it's kind of crazy, because it was a generation of resilience, and perseverance. You take off on your bike at 7 a.m. and your chain may have broke 4 or 5 times on the ride. So.
Yeah. And there was no cell phone to call mom to come get you. You had to figure out what you were going to do and how you were going to get back.
Exactly, man. So where you're at now, are you kind of, and I think you kind of alluded to this and mentioned it a little bit, but when you are around the children these days and the kids of this age, is that something that you set them aside to do, as far as, this is a new generation? They soft to the touch, and when you're dealing with kids, how do you relate where you come from, your story, without being the tough guy, and then, with the young kids, and then kind of incorporate the two? How do you walk that fine line?
Well, so this is my 7th year, I guess, teaching high school. And I never in a million years thought I would be a teacher. I have always, I owned a gym for about 10 years. I've always owned my own businesses, been in sales. I've sold into the medical industry, sold into the operating room. I worked for about 1.5 years when Dan Snyder first took over the team back in 2000. So never in a million years that I think I would find myself in a classroom. It happened after, part of my story, when I'd lost my business and everything was going on. I ended up substituting. And as I was substituting, I realized that I kind of like this. And there was an opening at the school, and they asked me if I wanted to be part of it. I passed all the tests I had to do. And, here we are 6, 7, 8 years later. I teach nutrition and wellness. So that's one of the things that makes it nice, because wellness, I incorporated into, mental health, mental wellness. So we talk about growth, again, from a grade standpoint, a physical standpoint, a mental, a spiritual, social with your friends. And in the beginning of the year, I'm lucky enough that with the curriculum that I have, I spend probably the first 7 or 8 weeks talking to the kids about mental health and growth. So I tell my story about the 2nd week of school. Probably I spend the entire class and go through and literally tell my story from when I was little all the way through high school to what we'll get into. My nephew and niece were murdered 16 years ago now. My mom and dad passed away. I lost my business. I lost my fiance. Just went through a lot. And I go through all of that with my kids. And it's funny because, they're high school kids. They're used to talking and making noise and doing stuff. And for that good part of that hour and a half, you can hear a pin drop. And, I tell them that. I said, the reason I tell you this story is not because I need you guys to know who I am, or, I don't need a whoa, poor Mr. Kirk kind of thing. I work at a Title I school, and there's a lot of kids that have gone through a lot of stuff that, I never experienced when I was growing up. And I tell them, I tell you guys my story because I want you to know, when I give you advice or I tell you something, I've been there. I've been through some crap. I have been up here and I have been at the top, and I have lived in a 9,000 square foot house on 6 acres of land, and I have lived in my car at a rest stop. I've been both places. So I want you guys to understand that the advice that I give, the stories I tell you, I'm not making them up. And it does wonders, for the kids to be able to relate to me on so many different levels. One of the first times I did that, a few years ago, after I had lost Sophia, I told my story, and the class was kind of, working their way out the door. And there was a young man standing there, and he was waiting for everybody to leave. And I'd spoken once or twice in the first 2 weeks to him, but no conversation. And the kids walked out the door, and he came up to me and he put his hand out. And he said, "Mr. Kirk, I wanted to kind of shake your hand and tell you thank you for telling us that story." And I said, "Oh, absolutely." I said, I just want you guys to know kind of where I'm coming from. Again, I'm not thinking too much of it. And he said, "Well, I wanted to let you know." He said, "I'm in a gang." And he said, "My dad was shot in a drive-by in July." And he said he was in a gang and some bad stuff happened, and he was at a gas station, and the rival gang came through and shot him in a drive-by. And he said, "I'm having a real hard time dealing with it." He said, "The other guys in the gang are telling me I need to get over, stop being weak, and I'm just struggling." And I said, I can't tell you what to do about the gang. You got to do what you think you got to do. But I said, I can tell you, as far as the loss goes, having been there, don't let anybody tell you how you're supposed to grieve losing your dad or how you deal with that. I said, you deal with it however you want to deal with it. And I said, I'll make you a deal. I said, this year during the school year, I said, I know there are going to be times where your grief or your emotion is overwhelming. And I said, I know you're tough and you don't want anybody to see that. I said, if you're in the middle of another class and something happens and you're getting that feeling, I said, stand up, be respectful to whoever the teacher is. And I said, you can walk out of that room. I said, I will contact all your teachers. I will take the heat for this. I said, but you can come to my room, knock on my door. You don't have to say a word to me. I said, I will open the door. You can go in the back and sit at my desk. You can put your head down. You can turn around. You can cry. You can whatever you need to do. You're more than welcome here. And he gave me a hug before he walked out. And twice that year he did. He came to my room, knocked on the door. I could see tears in his eyes. And I just opened the door and I continued my lecture with the class. And he went on the back and sat down and pulled his hoodie over his head and, kind of got himself together. So I think I have a unique perspective with the kids, especially the kids at my school, that I have a story and I've been kind of on both ends of it. And I tell them that. So I think it just makes it a little bit easier for them to relate to me and me to relate, to them. But it's definitely a unique perspective.
That is a unique perspective. And it's unique on two parts. As you're telling that story, I am listening from two sides. And yes, very unique perspective for the child, which is much needed, especially in this day and age. They need just what I would refer to as the OGs and the unks and father figures and people that have been there, and they can tell their story to and relate to. And on the flip side of that, you also have people of your generation, of our generation, which is who is listening to this podcast, my audience. It's a story of reinvention. You never seen yourself as a teacher, being a teacher, but it's the second act. It's your second part. So now you're someone who's on a totally different mission, doing a totally different thing. And it's kind of crazy that I'm speaking with you right now. And I didn't know I was speaking with someone that would be in a high school wellness educator speaking with kids. But I was just speaking with my wife earlier, and I was saying that I remember when we were coming up, the second act would be people would go into teaching. So they would work their job And then their second half of it, that's why we had teachers that we could talk to and speak to. And
Yeah.
you don't, it would be the elders though. So they could teach you life lessons along with the curriculum.
Yeah.
And you don't see that too often anymore.
Yeah. In the family and consumer science is the umbrella that my class falls under. And it's one of those classes and one of those parts of the curriculum where it's a lot of life lessons. The teachers that are in my hallway have all owned businesses, worked for the government, been in the military. They've had a life outside of school. They're not a 25-year teacher. You go to the English department, math department, that's where you get the people that have been there forever. But in my hallway, we talk about it all the time. We definitely bring a little bit different perspective. And for me, it's probably not even my second act. I don't even know what number act, this would be for me, because I definitely been hit pretty hard over the last 14 or 15 years, and had to reinvent myself a few times. And I expect that to continue. Where I am now is not where I expect to be in a couple of years. The foundation and stuff that I'm doing is just growing. So I'm hoping that that'll continue.
That's great, man. That's great. Even with that, the foundation, like, that is a legacy. That's a legacy movement. That's more so than when you're 25, 30 years old, you're probably not thinking about starting a foundation. You know what I mean? Like, and you have a cause and it's leaving a legacy and you're helping other people out. So yeah, man, let's speak on that a little bit. Like, how did you marry the two? So when did you begin the bodybuilding journey, and how did you marry that to the foundation that you currently have?
So the bodybuilding started when I was 15, wrestling in high school, 98-pound weight class. I probably weighed 88 pounds. And like I said, I was always little. So in high school, my brother was 4 years older than me, and he and his best friend would be down in the basement, 1984, with the old sand weights. If you remember the old crappy little plastic sand weights in my basement with my mom and dad, and they'd have their music cranked up on a record player. Yeah. And I saw them working out, and I was like, I want to do that, And the movies that we all watched in the 80s, you're watching Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're watching Rocky and Carl Weathers, and fighting Mr. T. I mean, everything we watched was Jean-Claude Van Damme. Everybody had muscles. That was what we saw, and just kind of bit me. So I started working out when I was in high school, and probably in my early 20s was the first time that I competed, and I kind of had the bug. Nothing crazy, I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed the gym, but as far as bodybuilding went, it wasn't a driving factor. Fast forward into my, I guess about I was probably 38, 39. My two best friends from high school and I decided that we were going to open up a gym. And that was what we thought was going to be the end all be all. In our minds, we're going to open up this gym and we're going to have 20 franchises, and that's what it's going to be. So here I am, definitely reinvented, once from there. But we opened up the gym, and about 2 years after the gym opened, my nephew and niece, Brittany and Connor, they were 12 and 13 years old. And my brother was divorced from their mom, and she was remarried, and her husband was a park ranger here in Prince William County. And he came home from work and got in a fight with her and shot her in the back of the head 3 times, and walked down to the kid's bedroom and put a gun to Connor's face and pulled the trigger and killed him in his sleep. And Brittany got up and ran to the door, and he grabbed her by the face and put a gun and shot her and blew the side of her head out. And she lived for about 4 hours. My brother and I were at the hospital. And to say that was probably the first time that my life changed at that point is an understatement. but it also prepared me for everything that was going to happen in the future. And I didn't know it then, and I look back and see it now. So they were murdered, and it was one of the first times where I really saw this weight room, gym, bodybuilding community kind of come together. Everybody stepped up and was just so supportive. And fast forward, I guess, about 8 years later, and I lost the gym, and the gym went out of business. And just before I had lost the gym, I had met just the most supportive thing in the world. And she was into bodybuilding and wanted to get her pro card in women's figure and women's physique. So I was helping her do that. I lost the gym. I ended up living in my car, as I said earlier, at a rest stop. I was literally rock bottom. And the only person that believed in me was her. I didn't believe in myself. And she just kept telling me, baby, it'll be okay. We'll get through this. We'll get through this. And living in my car and not knowing what I was going to do, I was contacted by a guy who owns a gold gym here. And he asked if I was still working out. I said, no. I said, we don't have the money to work out anywhere. I really can't do it. Sophia wants to get her pro card. And he said, well, Kelly, I'll tell you what. He said, I will give you 2 free memberships for you and Sophia if you promise me one thing. I said, so what's that? He said, you probably will be here tomorrow and start working out. I said, yep, I will be there. So the next day, I walked in at 30 in the morning every day. Fast forward 6 months, my physical started getting better. I started feeling a little bit better, looking a little bit better. And I realized as my physical got better, so did my mental. And that turned into me getting a job teaching. She started competing again. I was coaching her. She won junior nationals twice. I started working for the IFBB that puts on the Mr. Olympia and the NPC at local shows, expediting backstage, working about 17 shows a year. And we really became part of that whole bodybuilding community. And 4 years ago, to work a show on morning, and his mom was in town visiting, and she was staying with her at the hotel. And about 12:30 that night, Sophia passed away. And it was a different gut punch than my nephew and niece getting murdered. And when my nephew and niece were murdered, I didn't even say, about a month after they were
We're having technical difficulties. Let's see. We are going to try to bring the guest back in. I believe that I may have to end the stream to bring the guest back in and then restart it. So let's try that.